Right, Mr. President, I'd like to introduce our speaker today is Geoff Simmons, who's the Deputy Leader for the Opportunities Party and candidate for Wellington Central. I will slightly interrupt my interruption because we've just been talking about UNICEF, and I wanted to mention those of you who, of course, know our member Alex Hare. She's 14 days into sailing on UNICEF across the Atlantic right now. She's in 6th place, about 150 miles behind the leaders, going past the Cape Verde Islands, and so she'll be relishing all the training she's put in and hopefully not too wet and cold. I think she's got about another similar distance to go, or probably about another 20-something days to go before she'll get to Punta del Este, which is the end of the first leg. So again, she's aiming to raise 25,000 for UNICEF. So back to our speaker. Geoff grew up in barefoot in a kai house. So has anybody been to a kai house in Northland? I have. And then he went downhill to West Auckland. He's worked in Wellington for more than 15 years as an economist for Treasury and the Morgan Foundation. A famous American economist was introduced to a friend of his mother's as an economist, and she said, well, what's that? And the mother said, look, I think it's when you're really, really good with numbers but don't have enough personality to become an accountant. But Geoff's uniquely fitted for politics as an Opportunities Party candidate. I think his interest in comedy performance and playing in a samba band equip him well for dancing around our political landscape. And of course his tree planting, interest in our own town belt planning. So Richard Norman will be collaring you a little later on for that. So please welcome Geoff Simmons.
Kia ora koutou. I see what you guys are doing here. You know, you lure people here and you ply them with delicious lunch, and then when they're sort of sluggish afterwards, you hammer them with questions. But that's fine. We'll give it a go. I want to speak for no more than 10 minutes and to leave a good 10 minutes for questions. And thanks to Geoff for the intro. And can I just say I'm humbled to be in such esteemed company, and want to honour the work that Rotary does do in the town belt. I haven't come along to one of your planting days as yet, but I have my own group up in the in McAllister Park, at the top of McAllister Park there. So we're helping to contribute also in our own way. I have some scars on my arms at the moment from ripping out blackberry. Just want to make a note that you've got flyers from the Opportunities Party on your tables. You can feel free to have a quick look. That covers all of our major policies. So if you have any questions on those afterwards, I'll take them then. But what I really wanted to do is just cover a little bit about where we're coming from as a party, and take you through one of our policy ideas, so you can get a sense for what I like to call the radically central nature of our platform. Centrist in the idea that we are aiming to we're aiming to the values very much of middle New Zealand, but radical in the sense that we actually want policies that are actually going to deliver what New Zealanders want, rather than just fiddling around the edges and looking like you're doing something, which is what our major establishment parties tend to do. So both Gareth and I come from a background in economics. We're used to advising governments and NGOs and all that sort of stuff, acting as consultants or whatever, on policies that could make our country a better place. But we've both gotten frustrated, if you like, through the years of having politicians say to us, well, yes, that's a great idea and I could see how it would make a difference, but the public will never go for it. And that may well be the case, but we're at least giving it a crack, offering the public the option of radical change that could actually achieve what they're after. I think when you look at the record of both Labour and National, it's evident to see this kind of fiddling around the edges approach. I mean, National stand a lot by their economic record, but we have been in a productivity recession for the past 4 years. So that means the income per hour worked in the country has been falling. We have been working harder, but not working smarter. And actually that trend goes right back to the 1980s, regardless of red and blue governments. Labor is making a big platform on house prices and on fairness. But actually, again, both of those issues track back to the 1980s as well. And neither party has really made any gains on them. So the Opportunities Party is suggesting quite a radical platform of change that would actually deal to those issues. And we think that it's not a matter of improving the economy at the expense of fairness or improving the environment at the expense of the economy. We think actually there are ways that we could have win-win solutions here if we are prepared to deal with some of the sacred cows that exist in the New Zealand policy discourse. And I'll give you one example. This graph, oh, I didn't have that up. Right, that's our logo, by the way. This graph is from the last round of tax working groups that happened in 2010-2011. And by the way, there was another one before that, Labor, back in 2001. So we don't need another blimmin' tax working group. We've had two of them and the government hasn't implemented the findings from either. So how about we just do what has been talked about in the past? These two graphs show you the effective tax rates on different investments in New Zealand. And you can see quite clearly that the effective tax on owner-occupied housing is 0, far lower than all the others. Meanwhile, here, the effective tax on rental housing, that's the tax that landlords pay on the returns from rental housing, is still much lower than we see for other types of investments. New Zealand has the lowest taxes on housing in the world. We have the highest amount of our investment portfolio invested in housing of any country in the world. And we have some of the highest house prices in the world. Can you see a pattern here, folks? It's not rocket science. Housing has been the major driver of rising inequality in recent years, both at the top end, the rich getting richer through untaxed capital gain, and the poor getting poorer through higher rental costs. And it's not going into the quality of housing. You don't need to look very far to see that. It's going into speculating on land. This is not productive investment. You guys understand productive investment, and New Zealand doesn't do it. We have the same disease driving environmental degradation in the land-based sector, where actually farmers are intensifying their farming productions in the pursuit of capital gain rather than the pursuit of actual yield. Farmers aren't making any more money by intensifying, they're just pouring more nitrogen and water and palm kernel on the land. We're getting more nitrogen leaching into our waterways, but actually profits haven't risen. We're doing it simply to chase untaxed capital gain, just the same as housing. So this issue really is at the centre of New Zealand's economic, social and environmental malaise. It's driving our investment into unproductive areas and one of the reasons that we have such lacklustre productivity growth. So what's the Opportunities Party suggesting? Very simple. We even out those bars. We tax all investments the same. So how does that look? It allows us to generate eventually, because this would have to be phased in very slowly over 10 to 15 years, because if you introduced it overnight, the housing market would collapse and we would be in a massive debt crisis internationally, right? Because we have one of the highest net private foreign debts in the world. So we're very vulnerable in that respect. So we need to introduce it slowly so that house prices are held stable to allow time for incomes to catch up and houses to become affordable again. When fully implemented, we think this would raise about $11 billion in revenue, which allows us to cut income taxes by roughly a third. We don't want to collect any more tax. We want to hand that back to people to make our tax system fairer and more efficient. So we would reduce inequality, we would stop gambling on housing, and most importantly, we'd actually get New Zealanders investing in businesses. Can you imagine that, folks? Kiwis putting money into businesses that actually create jobs and exports. It's almost hard to imagine, because You talk to many business owners around the country these days, and they're weighing up, do I invest in my business, try and grow it, try and provide people with jobs, with all of the health and safety and tax implications that go along with that, or should I just buy a rental property? And actually, a lot of them just buy a rental property because it's a darn sight easier, and as we've seen, far more tax efficient. So we think this particular change would, as I said before, improve our economy, improve our environment, and improve our society. Having a fair tax system so that all income is taxed equally, you'll get a much more fair distribution of wealth, and stop all our money going into this speculation rabbit hole that is housing. So that is one of our policies. You'll see immediately, particularly those of you who have a large family home or several rental properties, you'll immediately see the radical nature of what we're proposing in the New Zealand context. And yes, of course, no establishment party is going to want to implement this as it is proposed, because it's political dynamite, but we're putting it up there as the best possible solution to our malaise. And we will negotiate with either Labour or National. We're prepared to work with either to actually find a way to implement this concept going forward. So there's one example of our policy. There's another 13 or 15 in here that you can have a look through. Happy to take questions on any and all. Yes?
Yes, my name is Gloria, and I'm extremely interested in what you propose. The capital gains tax can cut both ways and actually halt any type of extreme tenancy protection laws. I'm French. So we
Yes.
had it 5 years. After 5 years, we were able to sell our property without having to pay 50% of our profits. Then it was extended to 12 years under a Labour government. And then it was extended to 22 years, and now it's 30 years. 30 years later, you buy a property at €1,000 and you sell it 9,000. There's a complicated algorithm, but you still have to pay 50% on a certain amount of profit. Obviously, Paris never built, so the cost of housing in Paris is enormous. The tenancy protection laws make it to such a point that we don't want to rent. So it hasn't solved anything. The Germans have it every 2 years, and they have a more dynamic economy. So the story is, it becomes political football. And where do you stop?
Yes, good question. So we are not proposing a capital gains tax at all. What we are proposing is an asset tax, a minimum tax on all major assets, equivalent to the amount of tax you pay if that money was in the bank. So if you put money in the bank, you earn interest. At the moment it's about 3%, but the long-term average has been about 5%, and you pay tax at the marginal rate on that return, right? So we are saying that all assets have to declare at least as much tax as they would receive through a bank deposit. So it's not a capital gains tax, which I agree with you has caused all sorts of problems because overseas, because it basically creates a disincentive to not sell your home, right? Or to not sell your business, even worse. Capital gains taxes have been proven to hurt growth without really improving housing affordability at all. So yes, we totally oppose a capital gains tax. This is a tax imposing a minimum rate of return on all assets levied every year. Okay? And the idea there in terms of building new properties is that effectively this works out for people who have bare land, for land bankers, that they still have to pay this tax too. If you have your house that's empty, you're not renting it out, you have to pay this tax too. So it's an incredible incentive to utilise those assets, get building and get renting. Yes, Roger?
Geoff, what are your radical policies on the related issues of Wellington transport and climate change?
Yes, great questions. So we want to, on climate change, that's fairly straightforward. We want to see a move to a fossil fuel-free economy by 2050. And we think that there's a lot of win-wins along that way that we should be starting on right now. Yes, we need a Zero Carbon Act, we need a Climate Commission to do the long-term plan, but there's actually a lot of stuff in New Zealand that we could be doing right now if we had a higher carbon price. So if we kept the emissions trading scheme closed to international trade, we'd see the carbon price rise. That would generate money that we could reinvest in two major things. One, energy efficiency. So Europe did this in the early 2000s, had massive investments in energy efficiency. It saves money, it improves your health, and it reduces climate emissions at the same time. So massive returns, such as home insulation. But in Europe, they did this with businesses too. How can sitting down with business and working out how they can reduce their emissions and how they can be more energy efficient? So that's one area. The other big area that's an absolute no-brainer in New Zealand is making sure we plant the 1.1 million hectares of erosion-prone land, which is currently slipping into our rivers and into the sea. We could use that to store carbon, and we can improve water quality at the same time. So those are the no-brainers. On transport, what we want to do is to get politicians out of it entirely. We want to see the independence of NZTA restored, so there's no more fiddling. With National, they want their roads, and the Greens and New Zealand First want their trains. Everyone's playing Sim City with our transport infrastructure. That's probably a bit of a modern joke for you guys. Everyone's playing with their train sets. You know what Sim City is? Okay, good. All right. Everyone's playing with their toys, and these decisions are too long-term and too important for politicians to play with. We should have an independent institution that deals with public transport and roads, and is making decisions based on the best economic return, including looking forward to, on climate emissions as well. You can include that in the calculations. Thanks. Yes, Peter.
With respect to the housing, I understand what you're talking about for tax. What worries me is the people that have paid their house off and got to retirement, looking to have a retirement with a debt-free house,
yes,
but they're capital-rich, income poor.
Yeah.
How do they find money for a tax?
Yeah.
Are we going to have to sell our house when we get there because we can't afford to stay on it?
Fantastic question, Peter. Thank you. That's a great one. So there's two major answers to that. There's lots of little answers. Of course, this will have to be negotiated with, with whatever major party we're working with. But our response to that is twofold. First off, this has to be phased in, as I said. So what we're talking about is, is phased in over a period of 10 to 15 years. So when fully implemented, depending on what your risk, depending on what happens to interest rates in that time over 10 to 15 years, if you have interest rates currently at 3% and your tax rate is 33%, then that works out as roughly a 1% tax on the value of an asset every year. Okay? So that's the kind of scale we're talking about when fully implemented. So over time, that would need to be built up over 10 years. So you could say maybe you're going up 0.1% per year. So there's plenty of time for, I don't think the current retired generation are going to get too hit by that. The other thing that they can do in the meantime is defer payment. I mean, most countries in the world have an estate duty. New Zealand doesn't have that. Roger Douglas got rid of it. So effectively, this could transform into an estate duty so that people pay, when their estate is settled.
There's a big philosophical question, really,
Yeah.
because you spend your working life trying to build a capital base for your retirement. And
Yep.
the estate duty tax caused all sorts of anomalies, and it was canned, properly so. And so, how do you envisage people in that situation? I think a lot of retirees are now getting a lot less income than they have in the past because of
Low interest rates,
have
yeah.
gone back.
Yep.
And I can see there's going to be a lot of anomalies. Also, how do you value a farming situation where your net return is probably about 2%, maybe 3% if you're lucky? So how would you evaluate a situation like I have an interest in farming,
Yeah.
and I call farming a luxury hobby.
Yeah.
But so there are a lot of anomalies that, you know, what we call saying some philosophical things, but in practice, it's quite difficult.
Well, I don't see the farming example as an anomaly at all. We have farmed for capital gain. That's why farming gets, you know, sheep and beef farming gets on average a return of 2%, because we've been farming for capital gain. That has driven land prices so high that they can only eke out a return of 2%. So if it's not possible to get that kind of, you know, to get the minimum, well, first thing to point out is if you're already paying more tax than the minimum rate of return, there's no more tax to pay, right? So a business that's earning 5% return on its assets doesn't pay any more tax. Okay, so this is a tax on unproductive assets. So if you are a farm and you're getting a 2% return and there's no way to get a greater return from that, then I would suggest to you that the land is overvalued. Why is the land overvalued? Because we're chasing capital gain. And yes, I agree there's some philosophical issues in here, but I come back to this simple point back up here, that at the moment, different investments are taxed at different rates in New Zealand. Now, if you want to have a vibrant economy in New Zealand, the sort of which you see in Europe, you have two choices. You either increase the taxes on housing, as we're proposing, or you reduce the taxes on other investments. Now, some countries do this. They actually, you know, through their pension schemes, they make those tax-free so that they are just as attractive to invest in as housing currently is. But at the moment, we have this situation where, because housing is so favoured over other investments, because other investments you pay tax twice, right? You pay tax when you earn it, and then you use that money to make the investment, and you pay tax again on the income that comes from it. Whereas with housing, you only pay the tax once when you earn the money, then you stick it in the house. So that's the anomaly we have to address, and but I'm happy to continue discussions with this afterwards. I can leave my details, you can get in touch with me, or we can chat afterwards.
Thanks, Geoff. Geoff, I'll ask you to come up and thank the speaker.
Well, I'd like to thank my namesake for a good practical discussion around some fairly thorny issues, and there's certainly issues that somebody needs to confront sooner or later. It's just a question of whether anybody's brave enough to confront them sooner than later. No doubt an interesting few weeks ahead. I think they say a week's a long time in politics. I think in New Zealand it's about 24 hours is a long time in politics at the moment. So I'd like to thank Geoff, and if we can all join in thanking him for his time and wish him luck in the next few weeks. Thank you. And a small vote